joining us today. Now, while Raul is queuing up your presentation, I want to introduce you and let our audience know a little bit more about you. They can see that you work at Chevron because I see your little work hat in the back. And while he's doing that, I want to give everyone a little bit more information about Monique. Monique was born and raised in New Orleans, Louisiana, to Colombian parents. And Monique has a bachelor's degree in geology from the University of New Orleans and a master's in geophysics from the University of Texas at El Paso. She joined Chevron in 2004 as an exploration geophysicist for their Texas and Alaska North Slope U.S. assets. She currently serves as the head of the Global Exploration Review Team in Houston. And I am so proud because I'm always happy to find fellow STEM leaders from my hometown of Houston, Texas. So thank you, Monique, for joining us, and I will let you get started.
Great. Thank you very much, Melissa. I'm thrilled to be here. I appreciate the opportunity to speak about STEM and just my passion. So I'll start out then. As Melissa said, I'm currently the Global Exploration Review Team manager for Chevron. And I'm going to give you just a little bit of overview about my background and how I ended up in STEM, and most importantly, how I ended up where I am today, speaking to you guys. My family is Colombian, as Melissa mentioned earlier at the introduction. And they my mom was from Bogota. My father is from the interior, from a small town called Manizales. And they immigrated to the US in the 1960s. And so they went directly to New Orleans, Louisiana, separately, and they met there and they married in New Orleans. And we've kept a strong cultural heritage of Colombia. My parents raised me speaking only Spanish at home. And my grandmother lived with us, and my grandmother couldn't speak English. And so I had no other alternative but to speak Spanish at home. And we still go back to visit Colombia. Most of my family is still there. As I mentioned, my parents are from Bogota. We usually go to Cartagena, which is one of the beautiful vacation spots on the coast, and there are just some images there. And I don't know much you know about Colombia, but it's in South America in the northern part, and it has a lot of riches from natural resources, just like most countries do. But there's oil, there's mineral, and of course there's coffee. So next slide, please. So as I mentioned, my parents immigrated to the U.S. in the 1960s, and they immigrated directly into New Orleans, and they came to Louisiana basically seeking a brighter future. So they went there to further their education and make a living. And that's where I was born. So I was born in New Orleans, but actually I grew up in a suburb of New Orleans, which is about 15 minutes from the downtown of the city. And the little suburb is called River Ridge. It's actually, I think it's classified as a village because there are only 13,000 people in that suburb. And this is a little bit of snapshot on my background in New Orleans. New Orleans is it's a diverse city as far as its ethnicity currently. There's a lot of jazz music, there's Mardi Gras, there's a lot of just general influences from South America, from France. It's in the South, so it's a whole Southern culture. It's very focused on food and family. So it's a great place to grow up. However, just like every place, has pros and cons, and there were a few challenges. So as far as the challenges growing up there is that, at least in the suburb where I grew up, it was very non-diverse. And so this plays into a little bit of what I'm going to talk about in the subsequent slides, of the fact that I grew up in a non-diverse suburb. We were the only minorities in the neighborhood, and we were the only minorities, my sister and I, in elementary school. So I started kindergarten not being able to speak English because my parents only spoke to me in Spanish at home. They learned English in the US, but they wanted to instill a strong foundation of keeping old culture. And so they only spoke to me in Spanish, and my grandmother only spoke Spanish. So like I said, I went to kindergarten and I couldn't speak English. So yes, there was a learning curve. I don't necessarily remember the difficulties, but just a couple of, actually earlier this year before the lockdown, I had gone home to visit my parents, and I was cleaning up some old pictures and things, and I came across my kindergarten report card, and I'd like to say those were probably the first emojis because I saw that I had a few frowny faces in language arts for English in kindergarten. But let's say I got past that. I don't necessarily remember the steps, but I'm fluently speaking to you in English. I'm still fluently speaking in Spanish. So I'd like to say, please don't lose your cultural heritage. It's been an asset for me, and we'll get to that. So let's start off with the next slide. So I mentioned that I was in elementary school, and my sister and I were basically the only minorities in the school. And then I went to an all-girl Catholic high school in New Orleans proper. And there we were still just part of a handful of minorities in the school. And the school was good. Freshman year, I had a strong foundation in science, and I had an earth science class. And so that earth science class kind of sparked the desire for me to want to see different things. New Orleans, I don't know how much you know about it, but it's in the bayou. You saw that picture before. It's also very flat. There are no mountains. And so there's basically no topography. It's under sea level. So I was always looking for something else. And one day, I think this was my sophomore year, I was walking down the hallway, and I happened to see an advertisement on the bulletin board. And the advertisement was for an earth science minority field trip that was run through the local university, which is the University of New Orleans. And that field trip was aimed at sponsoring basically underprivileged or underrepresented minority groups to try to funnel them into earth science for a career or I would say a degree path into university. And so I signed up for it and I got a scholarship. And what that entailed was that it was a 3-week field trip going from New Orleans out to the west, mainly around Utah, to visit all the national parks within the area. And that was just such a wonderful experience. It was, I want to say by accident that I happened to see that advertisement. So you just don't know when something will cross your path that might be of interest and might catapult you to something else. So I'd say stay curious and stay open to what opportunities might be out there. I never dreamed that I would have that opportunity to escape New Orleans for 3 weeks in the summer to go out west and see all these national parks. My parents had to give permission. It was a scholarship. With that 3-week tour of the national parks, when we came back, we had 3 weeks of classes in the university. But it was just such an amazing experience. I got to meet a lot of other students from local high schools. And as you can see here on the slide, these are some pictures, some of my favorite pictures of the national parks that we went to visit. And if you squint, maybe not squint, but if you look at the center picture, that's a dinosaur footprint from the Dinosaur National Monument Park, which is just amazing. And then you can see just the beautiful landscapes that, again, remember where I grew up, the swamps of the southern U.S., lowlands and no mountains. This was just such an eye-opening experience for me. And since I already had taken that earth science class as a freshman in high school, this just kind of cemented the idea that I wanted to do something that would take me, let's say, out west, more outdoors, just appreciating the environment. So that's what initially sparked my interest. And so if we go to the next slide, I think, so there's a transition, I'll just look. So the next slide will come up, but my transition from high school into the university, I ended up going into the geology program at the University of New Orleans, who had sponsored this field trip from the high school sophomore year that I went. And so at the University of New Orleans, I majored in geology. And so when you'll see, when the slide comes up, oh, here it is, you'll see the logo there of the University of New Orleans. What you see in the background is the cathedral, which was on that picture in the opening slides. So there I majored in geology and I had a concentration in geophysics. And one thing my mom always told me growing up is that she wanted us to be very independent and to be able to survive on our own. Because my mother, I failed to mention this earlier, my mother was actually, came from a very matriarchal, I don't want to say society, but parentage. My grandfather passed away when my mom was 1, and so my grandmother raised 4 females by herself. She never remarried, and she just instilled strong family values, being able to survive on your own, being able to advance through education. And so my mom instilled that on in us. And when my mom had her family, she just had female daughters, their daughters. So that strong matriarchy continued down. So when I went to UNO, I was looking to continue my studies, and there weren't a lot of females in the department. There weren't a lot of females in STEM back then. And but it didn't faze me, and there weren't a lot of minorities either, but that didn't faze me either, because I had been accustomed to, again, the neighborhood that I grew up. That was how it was, and the same thing with the school. But one day, again, I was walking down the hallway, so look around for your surroundings. I was walking down the hallway, and I saw an advertisement from the Minerals Management Service. I'm not sure if you're familiar with that, but it's part of the Department of the Interior. And the Department of the Interior is the one who manages the land, or say offshore in this case, for the Gulf of Mexico, and the leases. So they hold an auction basically twice a year where oil companies can participate and try to lease these blocks to drill them. The bottom line is that they offer a co-op through the university. And so I applied and I got accepted for the co-op. And so I worked there. That was kind of my first, I don't want to say professional experience, but my first real job. I had worked at a Stewart before then, but this was a first real job where I had to apply the skills I was learning in the university. And so I worked there for a year, and at the end of the co-op, they actually offered me a position, but I wanted to move on and see something else outside of New Orleans, because this position would have been in New Orleans. And so instead, I decided to go and get my master's degree. And so that's how I ended up then going to University of Texas El Paso at UTEP. So UTEP was actually one of the stops along that minority field trip that I went to in high school, because they have an excellent earth science department. So we stopped there briefly, and that's kind of sparked my interest in the university. So I went to UTEP to major in geophysics. Actually, it was earthquake seismology, so nothing related to the petroleum industry. So I spent 2 years there, and at the time, I knew that I wasn't necessarily looking to get my PhD, and I wasn't sure what I was going to do next. But the oil companies came, and they were interviewing for internships. And so I interviewed with all the companies that were there, and I ended up getting an internship with a mid-sized company in Midland, Texas. So I went from El Paso to Midland, Texas, and spent the summer there, just learning about the industry and getting a feel for what it was like to work in the petroleum industry, not from the government side, but from a corporate side. And that was just a very eye-opening experience. That was my first kind of foray into, I'm going to say, truly a professional world. It was also, that was a satellite office, meaning it was close to the field. And so field where the operations were. And so it just, I think in my mind, cemented that that's the path that I wanted to go on. And so after that internship with that mid-sized company, they offered me a full-time position. And that full-time position was in Lafayette, Louisiana. And Lafayette is only about 2 hours from New Orleans. So if you'd advance to the next slide, please, you'll see, we'll talk a little bit about my first corporate jobs before I got to Chevron. And so I started out in that mid-sized oil company early in the 2000s. And at the time, the price of oil was low. And there were ups and downs. The oil industry has notoriously had its ups and downs. And I was there in Lafayette working in the Gulf of Mexico in exploration. Exploration means looking for places to drill, basically. And loved my job, but then the company announced that they were merging with another company, and they went through several rounds of layoffs. And they ended up closing the office, and they moved us all to Houston. And that's how I ended up in Houston with that mid-sized oil company. But unfortunately, after one of the rounds, I ended up being laid off. And the company offered kind of an outsourcing package of helping with either furthering your education or helping you basically polish up your resume, just giving you additional resources. And through that, it was a shock because it was my first corporate job, and I thought, you do a good job, you deliver on the technical, that things will go well, and And that was it that you needed to do to continue with a long career in the company. So it was eye-opening. And so when I got let go, it made me reflect on what I wanted to do next. And so I ended up taking a job with a service company. And for those of you that aren't familiar with that, that's basically a consultant company. Consultant meaning it provides services to oil companies. And so I worked at that company for about a year as a geophysicist. And you'll come to see throughout the flow of this is that you get to know the culture of a company. And what I mean by culture is the way the company treats its employees, the overall, the way they treat the environment, the way they treat their partners that they work with. And I decided after seeing the culture of the mid-sized oil company that I've been in and that service company that I was looking for something else. It just wasn't quite fitting with me, but I already knew that I had gone through a layoff, and I needed to survive somehow. And so, I was employed and I had a good job at that consulting company, but I was looking online to see how I could further my career down to something that I really wanted to do. And strangely enough, I found that Chevron had a posting on their internet site, and I applied for a position. Now, granted, this day, I do not know someone that has obtained a job by just applying online. I thought it was going to go off to the internet space and would never hear about it again. But no, within a month after applying online, I got a call from Chevron to come interview. And that's what kicked things off. And I'm going to say that was my trajectory on my first corporate jobs. And the things I learned from the mid-sized oil company, from being laid off, and from the culture of the consulting company, that's what sparked my being able to hire on at Chevron and my being able to survive and have a successful career thus far at Chevron. And so, in retrospect, being laid off was difficult. It was eye-opening. It was learning experience. I realized that, as I said earlier, that just doing the technical wasn't sufficient, that you also needed to network, you needed to advocate for yourself, and that some of the most strongest skills that you need, or the strongest, I should say, are being able to collaborate very well, communicate very well. And I'm not referring to whether someone has an accent or not. It's more of, can you communicate your ideas clearly to other individuals? Because you may be the best technical person, but if you can't communicate your ideas well, then it's not going to go far. And also that you need a mentor. And it's not just that people know you by name, it's that people truly know what your background is, what your skill set is, and someone that can advocate for you. And the company may assign a mentor to you, but if they don't, anyone around can be a mentor. So then let's move on to the next slide, talk a little bit about my time in Chevron. And so for those of you that aren't familiar with Chevron, Chevron is second largest oil and gas company. It's headquartered in the United States. There are about 48,000 employees. So I'm a drop in the bucket in the overall corporate employee pool. But the company has treated me very, very well. And just to give you some statistics, they produce about 2.9 million barrels per day, which is a lot of oil. So let's go to the next slide. So Chevron services all assets of the industry. What we call upstream is where I am. So I'm an exploration or scientist. So remember, my background is BS in geology, master's in geophysics. And so when I say a scientist, that's a blend of both geology and geophysics. And so I am in charge of looking for oil and gas. And then if you move up to the slide to the right, those are the other facets of the company. So the company not only does exploration, but they produce what they find, they transport it, and that's what's called the midstream sector. And then it then moves into what they call the downstream, which is refining the oil that comes out of the ground into something that's usable to sell to the market. And so that's the trajectory of the company that I'm in. We move to the next slide. Chevron is a worldwide company. They have exploration and production in many, many places in the world. And this is just a little snapshot of the places that they're in. And what I want to go to next on the next slide is just some of my some of my experiences. So let's talk about directly my trajectory here in Chevron. So since college, I've had 5 moves. So remember, I went to from New Orleans, I went to El Paso. From El Paso, I went to Midland. From Midland, I went back to El Paso to finish my degree. Then I went to Lafayette, Louisiana. Then I went to Houston. So those are the places that I've lived since college. I have 3 years of external experience outside of Chevron that I talked to you a little bit about. And I have 16 years thus far with Chevron. I've had 9 jobs in total here in Chevron, and I've traveled to 7 countries. So remember I said that that minority field trip was kind of a spark for me to want to go into earth science plus my earth science class. Well, Chevron has given me an opportunity to continue to travel and see a lot of amazing places and different cultures. And so that's continued with my overall curiosity of wanting to see more and more. So within Chevron, I've worked as technically as a geologist and geophysicist. I've also worked in more what they call planning roles, helping to put together a budget. I've worked in part of the organization where I do the operations, which means I'm responsible for planning wells that will be drilled. I've also taken a role in helping manage people's careers and giving them career guidance. And then in my current role, I'm the general manager for the Upstream, for the Global Headquarter Exploration Group, which means I provide assurance. I look at the overall global portfolio for exploration and come up with a technical assessment, myself and my team, on the risk of drilling there, and technical risk, and then also the amount of oil that we think we will find. So if we move to the next slide, we'll go over, I'll show you a little bit of the fun places that I've been in. So my first position within Chevron, or my second one, gave me the opportunity to go to North Slope, Alaska. So remember, I love to travel. I love to experience the outdoors and see different things. And this was just amazing. I never thought that I'd get to go to North Slope of Alaska. So this picture is me early on, 2 years into the company. I'm outfitted with all my Arctic gear. I went over two winters to the North Slope. The first winter was to acquire seismic. The second winter was to drill the wells, and it got as cold as minus 20 degrees Fahrenheit. That was the actual temperature. The wind chill that went down to minus 70 degrees. So amazing, amazing experience to be out on the North Slope. You can see the air in my Arctic gear. Remember, I'm from the South, where the temperatures get close to 100 in New Orleans, and here I am, a Hispanic girl that was naive when I first started in the industry, and then there I am on the slope with the company, and it was just such an amazing experience. But if we go to the next slide, I'll talk about a little bit about my first leadership position, and that was interesting. So that was about 10 years into the company, and when I thought of leadership, I didn't think about it as leadership initially. When I got that team lead position, I was thinking of it as I'm a manager. And that wasn't the appropriate attitude to have. And that's something that comes with time, with gaining that understanding. What I thought was going to be the biggest challenge of that role was, I thought it was going to be the technical part. But what was actually the biggest challenge for me was the communication and collaboration. So yes, I had to deliver on the technical, my team and I, but what was most important in order to succeed, what I came to find out, was strong communication, not just with my own team, but with my fellow colleagues and with my supervisors, whether that was verbal communication, email, face-to-face, video, or social media. That's all within the company. Any way that you communicate, I'm always saying that you have to assume positive intent, that whatever I'd like to trust first until I'm proven wrong. Because we're all trying to do the right thing, and we're all trying to succeed. And so that position not only gave me the opportunity to learn those leadership skills, but on the fun side, I got to travel to these exotic locations. So remember, I love to travel, I like to see the outdoors. So this was the first time that I got to go to West Africa. And you see a couple of countries there that I traveled to, and it was an adventure. One of those countries, they sent me in first, and they just said, someone will be there with a sign with your name on it. It'll say Monique, and you just follow that individual. And I thought, oh God, gosh, yeah, I hope that communications just don't fail and my cell phone connects, because if something goes wrong, what am I going to do? Because I might be by myself. But those were amazing experiences to get to experience another culture, to get to work with then the national oil companies there, to get to work with other geologists from other countries and get their perspectives. So it was a good experience. It gave me an opportunity to see something outside of the U.S. If we go to the next slide. So I'm going to round this out a little bit and talk about Chevron. Remember, I mentioned that every company has a culture. And so one of the things that Chevron strives for in their company culture is called the Chevron Way. And it's the way the company explains who we are, what we believe in, how we're going to achieve it, and where we aspire to go. And it's a strategy, it's a vision, and it also talks at its core about the company's values. So that's when I want to give you a little bit of flavor for the company's values and why I really enjoy working in a STEM field here for Chevron. So if we go to the next slide, the company is a very, very strong proponent of diversity and inclusion. And this was prior to current events, all the difficulties and challenges of 2020. This is something that's ultimately in the culture and the philosophy that Chevron has had for many years. And they have many initiatives to promote diversity and inclusion in the company. There are, I think, over 12 employee networks. And those networks, this is an example of Somos, which is the Hispanic and Latin American network for Chevron, and it's a global network. And Somos is a strong proponent of helping Hispanics succeed in the industry, helping them succeed in the company, whether it be here in the US or global. And there's the Women's Network, there's the Black Employees Network. There are many networks. So those networks are there to help the employees get their footing in the company and adjust. Remember, when I started out in my first mid-sized oil company, I didn't have a mentor. I didn't really understand what it meant to work in a corporate organization. I thought it was just delivering on the technical. I didn't have someone to take me aside and say, it's not just the technical, it's not just doing your job day to day, it's networking and it's collaborating and it's communicating. And so these employee networks help us, and someone like myself, basically open our eyes to what we need to do within the company. So we go to the next slide. I just want to leave you with a few final thoughts on my tips for success. First thing I'll say to it again, STEM is fun. I really, really love earth science and geology. It's my passion. I love traveling. I love seeing the outdoors. I love being able to contribute to finding new opportunities to produce oil and gas, which fuels us in many different aspects. But what's at core of all, I'll just leave the science aside for a moment, what's at the core of what I've seen that has helped me through my trajectory is leverage or multicultural background. Being bilingual has helped me for places that I've traveled. Understanding different cultures has helped me. My parents instilled, having a balance of both the American culture and my Colombian culture, taking the positives, the pros of both of those have helped me immensely. Secondly, be curious and be open to continuous learning. Curiosity is actually what's driven me along this path. If you recall, that first sign that I saw on the bulletin board in high school of getting to travel out west, that was my curiosity. The same thing with that first job I had with the government. That was a spark of curiosity. Next, recognize your strengths. So if your strength is math and science, there are many, many things that you can do. It's not just earth science. I know science and working in the industry is not typically what people think of. Traditionally, people think of engineering or medicine or something along those lines, but recognize what your strengths are. If you're strong at language arts, or if you're strong at communicating, you can blend science and communication. It's all embodied within a career trajectory, but know what those strengths are and try to build on those. Seek out a mentor. Remember, I said that when I first started, I didn't understand the value of a mentor. I didn't understand the value of clearly communicating my technical work. in order to continue moving up in the company. So whether it's a mentor in your career or a mentor in your schooling, or if it's a mentor in your day-to-day life, but someone that has a lot of experience that can guide you. Next, recognize your failures as learning opportunities. So my being laid off in a mid-sized oil company, yes, was a failure. Let's say a failure. It was a learning opportunity for me. I learned what type of company I wanted to work for, what I needed to do if I wanted to have a long-term career. And I learned that perseverance is a strong asset to have. I never gave up. And then lastly, and you've heard me mention this several times, learn to communicate effectively and to collaborate. So I'll leave you again with STEM is fun. I love earth science. I love geology. And considering the path that I've been on, it's treated me well this far. And thanks for the opportunity to speak to you today. I think I'm handing it back to Melissa at this point.
Yes, thank you, Monique, so much for sharing all of that wonderful information. And I am just amazed at how your journey got started. Actually, I just recently took a trip west like you did, not from New Orleans, but from here. And my son has always been into, I don't know if it's like stones and rocks. I mean, he normally collects one from everywhere we go. And that was one of his picks that he wanted to see. He wanted to see the Grand Canyon. And so while you were explaining your journey, I was thinking, maybe that's it. Maybe that's what he wants to do. So I hope that this inspires him. I will be showing this talk to him later.
I love rocks.
And so many kids, they don't think about the kinds of careers that some of their passions and their hobbies and the things that they love to see and feel actually can lead to something. So thank you for sharing that experience with everyone here on our program today. Now, we did have some questions while you were speaking that were coming in. And so one of the first questions that we got was, would you rather work in sustainable energy rather than fossil fuel energy?
Oh, that's a good question. I'd say both. I mean, obviously, I'm in the oil industry, and the primary is fossil fuels. And fossil fuels are what drives, I don't want to say progress, but thus far has been progress, right? We know it's the fundamental on electricity and driving and car and all that and travel. But the sustainable is also, I think, that has to be balanced against fossil fuels. And Chevron actually has a balance of both of those. And I'm not in that sector of it. I'm in the fossil fuel, but I like the exploration part, the unknown, and trying to figure out. I have a philosophy. I have a model in my mind, and I get to go test it out and see if we actually can find something in order to produce the oil, which is going to help fuel many, many things. So for me personally, I like the fossil fuel side, but I completely understand the sustainable side and the value of sustainable.
Thank you, Monique. So here we have another question. Were you curious for other paths besides geology? How did you narrow your career goal?
That's an interesting one. So I didn't mention this, but my parents didn't have cable growing up, or I didn't have it growing up, I should say. And I used to see a lot of black and white movies. I'm not that old, so I'm just going to say I used to see a lot of black and white movies growing up. And a lot of those black and white movies that came on the weekends were, for some reason, those early 20th century, like 1930s Egyptian archaeology movies, mummy movies. And I had convinced myself that I wanted to be an Egyptologist, an archaeologist in Egypt, based off of those movies. And I just had this, it got in my mind, that's what I wanted to do. And that's similar to geology, without the science. I wouldn't say without the science, but it's more kind of a social and liberal arts career path in some aspects. But frankly, I decided that wasn't the trajectory for me. I had a conversation with my parents, and I said, look, how are you going to survive being an archaeologist? And really, are you going to be an archaeologist in Egypt? you're going to need a PhD and do a lot of research. And so that, I said, okay, I'm going to go into geology. But there was something else. I, I didn't mention that I actually started out as a geology major. I mean, I'm sorry, as an English major in college because I thought geology was more of a hobby. I thought, traveling in the West. I didn't really understand the oil industry. So I thought, what am I going to do? And I was good at English and communication and liberal arts. I say communication, I can speak one-on-one. I know I had some other issues on teaming at the beginning, but and so I thought, I'm gonna major in English and then I'm gonna move on into a law degree. Again, traditionally, my parents are immigrants. What are the things that they try to push you for? Engineering, being a teacher, law, medicine. The things that are traditional and that most people are aware of. Or science, geology, petroleum industry. What was that? So I didn't know really. But English turned out to be a hobby, and by my first year in, I switched to geology. I had kept in contact with the professors that I had gone on that field trip with, and so I switched over. I still have a passion for reading. I figured classic English novels were not going to sustain me.
I'm glad that you shared that with our students because, there might be a misconception because we're adults that we just figured it all out and we decided on a career and we took off from there. But sometimes it's not quite that easy. So thank you for sharing that you were an English major and then you switched over.
Yeah.
Now, you mentioned something about your parents and how that contributed to your decision as far as what path to take. Did they really understand what geology was or is?
No. So I think by the time I told them that I was going to switch, it was already that was my sophomore year in college, and that was about the time that I had gotten hired on also for that position with the government. And so in their mind, they're thinking, oh, okay, we don't really understand what our science is or what the career path is, but we can see that it leads to a job, at least with the government, that you're going to be employed and we're not going to sustain you for the rest of your life. I think, them understanding that there was a career path in our science was comforting to them. And I think ultimately they would have supported me. They had it in their they had my best interest at heart when they tried to sway me from archaeology. And looking back, yes, I don't know what fantasy I was thinking of back then.
Now that you say archaeology, my son from a very young age, he wanted to be a paleontologist.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's still up there in his top career paths, but that's one of the reasons why he's always collected like anything that has to do with fossils and stones and rocks. So for all you students out there that have that interest, here is another career path that you may not be thinking about.
Yeah.
But we have more questions that are coming in, so let's move on to the next one. During your travel experiences, what did you like the most?
Oh, getting to see another culture. I know I mentioned, I had those pictures of Colombia and I had traveled to Colombia and I got to see, and New Orleans itself has a lot of rich culture for being in the US. But just getting to experience, even if it was just for a couple of weeks, off and on, what it's like to be in Africa. I had no clue, just from what I saw on TV, and it was just eye-opening experience. About all of the positives that there are in other areas. We think that, at least the images that I had of Africa, I was thinking like safari everywhere or desert, and that's not the case. That's not the case. Modern cities. I think actually one of the most beautiful hotels that I stayed in was in Senegal. I've traveled to Europe with the company too, and yes, the nicest hotel was in Senegal, and that was not the highlight. I'm not saying that was the reason why I like to travel. It wasn't getting to meet the different nationalities and just seeing how the experiences that people had and comparing them to what I had, and how even though we had different cultures and we grew up in different continents, we still migrated towards the same career path, and that was interesting.
Very cool. We have another question here. Now, I know that you talked about being an archaeologist, but we have a question about what was your dream job when you were younger? Was it being an archaeologist or did you have another dream job?
No, my dream job was being an archaeologist. So I had those black and white mummy movies, and then Indiana Jones had come out, although he was not a female, obviously. Dream job, yeah, I was an archaeologist. And actually, so let me backtrack. So when I started with Chevron, my dream job was to live in another country and work for the company. To the different twists and turns that I've had with Chevron, I haven't had that opportunity yet, but I've gotten to travel. And I just want to mention one thing. When I started out, my first mentor, we had a mentoring discussion on development and career paths. And the company, within the company, we have our own internal resume, and there's also like what they call a development plan, and you outline where you think you may want to go in a few years. And he asked me, "What do you want to do?" And I said, "Oh, I'd love to manage the business in another country or reach executive level." Well, one, we know there's only one CEO. We'll leave that. And I said, "But I'm not going to put that down. I'm going to say this is a typical Hispanic thing. You're humble. You're like, I'm not going to put down that I want to be an executive in the company." He said, "Why not? Everyone has aspirations. There's nothing wrong with having an aspiration. And if you don't put down what your aspiration is, or you don't make it known what your aspirations are, then you're never going to have a chance to get there. You're already shooting yourself in the foot before you even start." And so that was one of the, I think one of the defining moments of when I first started, of getting that mentor, having him help me map out a trajectory. And so my dream job was to reach the executive level once I started working in the industry. And I'm thrilled that I've gotten to where I am this far.
Thank you, Monique, for that piece of advice. You are right. Some of us don't want to dream big because we can't imagine it, but I now do believe in the power of affirmation
Yeah.
and, setting your mind to something. So thank you for sharing that. We have some more questions that are coming in. You mentioned a few things that led to your final career choice. Are there any other hobbies that helped narrow your field? Possibly rock hounding?
Yes, I love to collect rocks. They're probably too small. I have a fossil and a mineral in the back. We have them all over my house. Yeah, my parents didn't know about that. And again, in New Orleans, besides shale and mud, there are no rocks, no minerals. Let's just say, at least what we think of pretty nice, pretty colorful minerals. But it was that geology field trip that I took in high school that really sparked it. Because we went to not only to those national parks, but we went to different areas where we could, say, rock hound, collect minerals. And it's just fun. They're beautiful. You could imagine that something like that's produced naturally.
Now, when you said that you went away for 3 weeks, I was thinking as being a young Latina in our culture, how did you convince your parents to let you go away for 3 weeks? How hard was that?
It's interesting because, again, I grew up in a basically all female household besides my father. And as you can imagine, I couldn't walk down the corner without them knowing where I was going, much less have sleepovers at someone's house or anything like that. I honestly think that they were open to it because it was run through the university and kind of a partnership between the school and the university, and they saw it as something formal. This wasn't just me fly by night just saying I want to go take off somewhere. They had to sign paperwork officially through the university that they would basically release me to the university. Yeah, I'm actually surprised, but obviously it worked out well.
Thank you. Now, our next question is, how do you combine your career with your family life? Has it been challenging for you?
Oh, that's a good question. So just a little bit about my background. I've been married for about 14 years. Shouldn't have that 14 years. I have one child. And it can be a struggle at times, and it depends on what your priorities are. At the time when I first started working, I was single, and then I ended up getting married. And for me, I ended up prioritizing my career first. But that's a personal choice I had. I had colleagues and friends who prioritized their family first, meaning the female started family pretty early on in their career, but I chose the other way. I waited. I put my career first and then decided to have a family. And there are pros and cons of doing it either way. But I think it takes a strong partnership with your partner, whoever that may be, and whatever those circumstances are, in order to be able to balance having a family and working, because you can't do it all. Something will fail, whether the family side or the work side. So you need a strong support network. And you also, I think, need to be disciplined and know what your boundaries are. Boundaries meaning if you set your path that you just want to prioritize career and that's the only thing, then recognize that personal life may suffer, or it may be delayed, or maybe you say, I want to have a strong career, but I know what my limits are, and I'm not going to sacrifice my family for that. And so you say, all right, if I start a family, I'm going to take extended time off, or I'm going to go work part-time. But those are personal decisions that need to be made.
Thank you, Monique. Now, one of we're winding down our questions. I see a few more coming in, so I will try to get through all of your questions, students and family members. But we have a comment here. We hear often that students change from STEM disciplines to English or non-STEM disciplines. Great to hear that you did the opposite. Was it hard for you? Any prerequisites you need to take?
Okay. So it depends on your, let's say it depends on your how you did in high school. Again, recognize your strengths. Everyone knows and deep down what their strengths are as far as, are you struggling with math and science? Or when do you struggle more with math and science or the liberal arts side? And if have that honest conversation with your inner self to help kind of figure out which path you should go on. So I think if you can narrow down to STEM versus liberal arts, that's the first thing. And then as far as prerequisites, strong science and math background. But even though I have a strong science math background, I still need to be able, remember I said communicate well, and that's in all forms, writing and speaking. And so don't discount if you decide to take a STEM track, the value of taking a strong communication class or a strong writing class in college. Prerequisites for me, again, advanced math, advanced science, and this is my personal opinion, but I feel as though geology is actually one of those, I don't want to say it's more challenging, but geology is a combination of several science. It's chemistry, it's biology, physics, and you throw the math in there. So to me, it's a melting pot. So whatever sciences you can take will prepare you for your STEM path.
Thank you. Thank you. Now, you mentioned something earlier throughout your presentation, and that was how you're part of a Hispanic group within Chevron.
Yes.
And I was interested to share with all our students, because I know that you and I have spoke about this before, was the opportunities of internships and other opportunities that Chevron offers students. I don't know of high school, but I know definitely college. Can you share a little bit more about that information with everyone that is listening today?
Sure. So let's start with college and I'll work my way back. So for university, Chevron recruits, just like other oil companies, recruits at the universities, and they look to hire diverse students with a strong technical background if you're going into science. Actually, I should mention, Chevron doesn't just hire scientists. Let me just throw that out there. There are many, many paths that you can take within the company. If you're strong in communications, Chevron has a large communications department. If you want to go into law, they have a law department. They have even health side, or if you're more on the environmental side, there are all different aspects within the company. So Chevron comes to recruit on the campus. So they usually go out in the fall. So look for the advertisements through the career center or through the department. So that's for college. Oh, and I forgot to mention, if you're an engineer, they hire out of a bachelor's degree and out of the master's program. If you're going into science, they hire out of a master's and a PhD only. As far as high school and internships, we don't necessarily offer internships to high school students, but Chevron funds programs at several universities to help, similar to that high school program that I went to. They fund something similar in some high schools and colleges to help pave those paths into science.
Thank you, Monique. Now, was once in the corporate world, and I know that you mentioned how you didn't have a mentor early on that could teach you how to maneuver being in the corporate world.
Yeah.
Is there any advice that you would like to share with our students or our young adults that are making that transition from possibly college to the corporate world or starting to interview as they start to graduate? Can you give any advice to them about how to maneuver through that transition?
Definitely. So most companies have some sort of training program that they send the new employees to. And the company may assign you a mentor, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to click with that mentor. You might, but you might not. So look out for those peers that are around you that have more experience that can help you navigate. Actually, I take that back. It's not just people that have lots of experience. There could be other new hires that are a little bit further along that have already navigated the system in a big company like this for the first couple of years that can help you. There are also very senior people that can help you. There are people that can mentor you on the technical part, but then there are other people that can mentor you on the communication and the collaboration side, or just how to shape your professional career. You don't just have to have one mentor. It's not necessarily the person that's assigned to you either. So look to see someone that you can build a rapport with, and then you can build a trusting relationship with. That's the number one thing. And then if you're coming in new, or if you're trying to break into the industry, I think it's to what I call self-advocate. You don't go overboard and you just excessively talk about yourself, but you want to talk about all of your skills and the good things that you can bring to the company. Why should the company, what value you can bring to the company, and why they should hire you. And one of those things, multicultural background, multiple languages, being able to function in different environments. And we all come from different backgrounds. So those are strong things that we as Hispanics can bring to big companies.
Thank you, Monique, and thank you for your time today. Both Raul and I have enjoyed our time with you and learning so much about geology. You know, like I said, that's something that my son is passionate about. So I will be taking all your information to him and saying, look, this is something that you can do yourself. You know, you love to travel just like Monique does. You love collecting rocks. And so that is something for all our students, not just my son, to think about when selecting their career paths early on. Thank you, Monique, for your time. Is there any last minute words that you would like to share with everyone that is watching us today?
Yes. Lastly, leverage your multicultural background, learn to communicate well, and don't be afraid of taking a chance, and stay curious. Thank you.